in the West, it's easy for people. Like I saw yesterday, I think it was Extinction Rebellion or one of these damn groups put out this message saying that, well, people should just stop flying because flying produces water vapor and carbon dioxide. And, really, we don't need to fly. And so I'm reading that and I'm thinking, well, because there's Marxism of a terrible type lurking underneath. It's like, well, who the hell determines what we need exactly? I mean, first of all, needs aren't self-evident. Really what you need to do is you need to breathe, you need to drink water, and you need to eat. After that, what constitutes a need gets pretty damn dubious. And my concern is that if you get people adjudicating the comparative validity of need, you turn the whole world over to people who say, well, you don't really need that. And you don't really need shelter. You don't really need, you can have bugs. You don't really need food. You can eat a minimal protein source. Well, you don't really need children because they're kind of hard on the planet anyways. You certainly don't need pets because they add to the carbon dioxide load. You don't need your fireplace. You don't need a gas stove. You don't need a heater. And then what you have is this insistence that the way to planetary salvation is to tell other people what they don't get to have. And what's interesting about that too, and this is the hypocritical element, and I certainly see this at the elite Davos global level, it's like, well, exactly who are you telling here that they don't get to have what they need? Because you don't mean that for yourself. You're not going to go live in a damn hut in the middle of Africa and burn dung. You're not proposing that. You're proposing that these damn poor people in the third world country, and maybe in your own country, and there's too many of those blighters anyways, that they should just be bloody well satisfied with the fact that they've got what they have now, and they shouldn't in any manner ever dream of having the sort of wealth of opportunities and security that we have in the West. Then we could talk about wealth, because people in the West are guilty about wealth. Well, we have all these things we don't need. It's like, well, yeah, that's actually the definition of wealth. You got a choice of toothbrushes. Maybe you don't need it, but it's not a bad side effect. But we should get down to brass tacks here, people. When we're talking about wealth for the typical person, here's what we're talking about. Your house isn't too cold or too hot. So you have heating and maybe you have air conditioning. That'd be kind of nice. You have running water. You have good sanitation. So you have a toilet and you have clean water. You have a plentiful supply of high quality food that you don't have to spend all your time scrounging around to deliver, and it's reliably sourced. And your children have the opportunity to live healthily, and to be educated. That's like 90% of wealth. And so when we're talking about wealth that we want to provide the rest of the world, we're not talking about 1920s spats-wearing capitalist depredations, champagne, hooker, and cocaine. We're talking about the basics of life, right? Temperature regulation, provision of water, provision of food, health and opportunity for children. And we still haven't provided that to everyone in the world, and we could. That's one of the things that's so optimistic about your work. Not only could we do that, we should do it, and we could and should do it in a way that would benefit the long-term sustainability of the planet.
Yeah, and look, again, you rightly point out that people will want to manipulate your choices, and not only does that have a dubious and sort of moral impact, but it's also, just from an economist's point of view, if you tell people you can't fly, it's not like they're going to say, oh, I was planning on spending 5% of my income on flights, so I'm just going to burn these money. I'm just going to spend it on other stuff, which also produce carbon emissions. And so, we've no sense of saying the only real way, and I have some respect, sort of intellectual respect, for these people who are actually saying the only way to solve global warming is by making everyone poor, what's called degrowth. First, we make the rich world poor, and then once the poor world have gotten slightly richer, we also say stop to them. At least it's intellectually honest. It's also terribly anti-human. And it's not going to happen. There's no constituency. No politician would ever get voted into office, or if he or she actually delivered on it, would get re-elected on that sort of platform. And what that tells you is this is just simply, again, wishful thinking. And I keep getting back to saying, if you are actually serious about problems, are you going to are you going to suggest something that'll actually work? Or are you just going to suggest something that makes you feel good, or that have no chance on Earth to get carried through? Again, there is an argument, and I think there's a legitimate argument for putting a carbon tax on things. That's a simple way that we make regulation that says there's a global bad here, we tax it, and then you put that global bad into your considerations. But that's how you solve it efficiently. And of course, the reality of that is that in any realistic formulation of this, people will fly slightly less. And that's no good for many of these moral crusaders, because they want to completely get rid of it. It's not going to happen. What needs to happen if you actually want to solve this problem again is to get innovation. We already know how to, for instance, decarbonize most of the electricity system. It's just through nuclear. We know that's worked for 50 years. The reason why we're not doing it, and the reason why I'm a little skeptical about it, is that it's too costly right now. We can have a whole conversation about why that's the case. But there's a lot of innovation going on about fourth generation nuclear that could become much cheaper. We just saw the breakthrough, maybe fusion as well. But the point is that there's lots of technologies. Those are the ones that we're going to focus on, because again, you're not going to tell people you can't have your whale, you have to dim your light. What you can say is, oh, here's a better alternative. Oh, it also happens to be cheaper, and it doesn't kill whales.
So the degrowth model is predicated on the idea that, well, let's lay out the ideas, that really there are too many people on the planet, and the people who are there now, especially the rich ones, are consuming far too many resources per capita. And so the only way forward to a sustainable planet is through degrowth. Okay, so let's take that apart. First of all, who's going to impose that degrowth? Like, can you imagine the totalitarian state that would have to be built in order for every single one of your purchases to be monitored, which is really what the plan is in some real sense? I mean, that's just a terrible, nightmarish vision of petty tyranny everywhere, where every single move you make is analyzed in terms of its overall planetary consequence, and only calculated by people who do not have your best interests in mind, by the way. But worse than that is that there isn't any evidence whatsoever that if you use this strategy of degrowth and you make people poor, that you're going to get anything approximating the beneficial effect that you propose. I mean, let's look at how this is already playing out. So what has Germany managed with an approximate degrowth strategy? I mean, so part of the degrowth is, well, we certainly don't need fossil fuels or nuclear on the energy front. Okay, so from what I've been able to gather now, energy is about 5 times more expensive per unit cost in Germany than it is in the United States. A huge number of industrial endeavors are fleeing Germany for US, which isn't so bad, or China, which is really not good, because it's too expensive even to do such things as build batteries for electric cars in Germany now. But also, you might say, well, that's all worth it, because now we have all these renewables and the place is much cleaner, and if we have to pay a price in terms of loss of industrial productivity, c'est la vie. But I read the other day too, and I hope this is accurate, that Germany has fallen to something underneath the 100th position in the world in terms of emissions per unit of energy produced, because as we've moved foolishly and precipitously towards unreliable renewals, especially on the wind and solar front, the Germans have had to, especially because they killed their nuclear plants, they've had to turn back to coal. And so now they're burning way more coal than they used to for 5 times the electricity price and unreliable power to boot. And so this degrowth philosophy, which violates the presuppositions of economic motivation, let's say on a psychological and economic front, is not only going to demolish the industrial structure, make the poor much poorer and more desperate, but it's going to bring about worsening of the conditions for environmental sustainability, and very, very rapidly. Now, we're also seeing in Europe, and you can comment on this a bit, is that because we're now in an energy crisis, a foolish energy crisis, that people are starting to deforest Europe, and they're starting to burn peat in Ireland again because they have to heat their damn homes. So even by the standards of the environmentalists themselves, perverse though those standards may be, the degrowth philosophy is completely unsustainable politically and psychologically. Because you're just not going to tell people, you know, you can let grandma freeze in the dark.